I think that's all of it.
I'd say you made surprisingly good time on that file, Alice.
I've been working on that thing for almost a week.
You were ahead of schedule. By my calculations, you should have taken at least another 2 days to finish it.
All right, how do I send this to the archive instead of to Marianne?
Push the blue button on the lower left side of the housing.
This one? How far down does that tube go?
The vacuum tube delivery system was state-of-the-art when it was first installed in the Institute. It was originally used to create direct lines between the archive and the director's offices. But the cataloger workstations were installed in the middle of the system, acting as a breakpoint between the higher-ups and the central distribution location.
While that is fascinating, Dinah, it's not the question I asked you.
I'm sorry, Alice, but part of the reason the vacuum tube delivery system has been maintained is to prevent unnecessary contact between witness catalogers and the archive itself.
So you're saying I'm never going to meet the Duchess face to face?
It is extremely unlikely. While the system was originally installed as a technological convenience, the security benefit proved quite a boon to the Institute's work.
I'll strive to conceal my disappointment.
Your sarcasm is becoming a pattern, Alice. Rest assured, though, you don't want to meet the Duchess if you can avoid it.
I'll take your word for it. I think I'm gonna take an early lunch today. They're probably not gonna have anything for me right away. What? Shit, don't tell me I messed something up. Email from Central_Archive. Alice, thank you so much for getting that file back to us. We expected you to take longer with it, but while you were working on it, other archivists have been assembling a backlog. It's policy to ensure that only one file is sent to a cataloger at a time. So now that your last one has been turned in, we would appreciate you beginning this next one at your earliest convenience. So much for taking an early lunch.
If you need a break, Alice, you could still go. I'm not going to tell on you.
No, I sat back down. I'll at least take a look at this one and see what it's all about. Alright, let's see here. This field report was submitted by Agent Diamond, who claims to have witnessed an alternate world where powerful beings were engaged in various wars of influence among a seemingly modern, mortal world that was quite similar to our own. The incident in question involved an... Wait, that can't be right. Ahem. The incident in question involved an angel, a Babylonian god, and a disagreement over sacrifices?
Let me know when you're finished, Alice.
Yeah, sure thing.
Suffer the children. Hollywood looks different in the rain. The false-fronted glamour washes off like a starlet's makeup, revealing the pitted scars and cracked foundations just beneath the surface. The hands and footprints of the old kings and queens of Tinseltown fill up with dirty water, and their names are drowned as if they'd never been. Pacific thunder rumbles through the alleys in nameless, wordless sermons, and lightning streaks between the clouds in bright flashes like the whole city was a crime scene being photographed. The place would never be clean, but beneath the weeping sky, it had the good grace to be honest. A faded sedan turned off the boulevard, heading downstream toward the ocean front. It drove 3 blocks, then 4, slowing a little more at each intersection, the way people do when they're trying to find a place they've never been to in the dark. The car stopped halfway up the block and pulled to the curb. A man got out, tugging at his windbreaker's zipper while trying his damnedest to get to the sidewalk without soaking his shoes in the gutter. He wrestled open the back door and struggled with something. He lifted out a bundle, and over the rain and thunder, I heard a baby cry. The driver froze and quickly looked left and right. For a moment, I figured he'd get back in his car and drive away. Instead, he patted his swaddling package, turned, and pushed his way through a revolving door. The door shushed past 3 empty slots and went still. I gazed up at the building. It was a statuesque black thing, all glass and steel, that stood tall above its 2 neighbors. There were no red warning lights on the roof, no security lamps out front. There were no doormen, and no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find an address plaque. The place was set back from the street, and it would have been easy to miss in full daylight. On a night like tonight, it was all but invisible. I puffed on my stogie and waited. A taxi drove by, then reversed the way it had come. A sodden newspaper gave up the good fight and sank into the gutter. The sedan's automatic headlights shut off. The rain fell. No one came out of the building. I blew out a lungful of smoke, then tossed my cigar into the deluge. "Thus may you walk in the way of good men, and keep to the paths of the just," I said, reaching under my arm and checking my weapon before turning up the collar of my olive drab. "For the upright will dwell in the land, and the honest will remain in it. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the faithless will be rooted out of it." I ducked into the rain and splashed over to the sedan. The keys were gone, the doors were locked, and except for an old car seat in the rear and a thin manila folder in the passenger footwell, the interior was empty. I shook my head, jammed my hands into my pockets, and shouldered my way through the tower's front door. I stepped into another world. Acres of marble floors the color of fresh cream rolled away from me. The stone shot through with veins of gold. Gilded lamps held softly glowing half-moons, and sumptuous leather chairs the color of fine chocolate clustered atop carpets that cost more than most people's condos. Hand-blown glass bowls held refreshments, and fountains along the walls filled the room with a liquid music that was fine as any instrument. Caryatids supported the roof, but every structural statue had the face of a beautiful woman and the body of some intricately carved beast of burden. Hanging plants and potted fronds breathed out their clean, fresh scents and provided privacy by turning every seating area into a tiny oasis. In a town that had made wealth its religion, this place was a temple. I shook the rain off my coat and headed up the center aisle. The rear wall was blank, except for 7 narrow, identical hallways. Each was dimly lit like the mouth of a cave where some devil lay sleeping. Between the halls and the rest of the sumptuous suite was a desk the size of an ancient altar. It was carved from the same stone as everything else, and inlaid with the heads of stylized animals in a fashion that would have been more at home in a museum than in an office building. Taloned feet big enough to clutch a child were carved into the corners. The thing was imposing and beautiful in its own way. Same could be said of the woman who sat behind it. She was dark-haired and long-limbed, with a straight back and sharp collarbones. Her eyes were smoky, and her 2 long nails were a garish red. She dressed in ragged-edged silk, and when she smiled, her teeth were very strong and very white. She was too old to be young, and too young to be old. Most people wouldn't notice that her grin was a little too sharp, or that between her teeth were graying morsels that perfumed her breath with the scent of a carrion feast. Her nostrils flared as I got closer, and she writhed like an excited cat scenting prey.
Well, well, well.
She purred.
Look who's come in from out of the rain.
Better look fast, I ain't gonna be here long.
When are you ever, Malachi?
She laughed, and it was a raw, unbridled sound that echoed in the empty halls.
I take it you don't have an appointment?
Is your boss busy?
Too busy for messengers who don't have the common courtesy to call ahead,
She said, flashing me her serrated grin again.
There's a lot of people in this town. A lot of fools and a lot of gold. He can't make time for all of you.
He'll make time for me,
Oh?
she asked, leaning her elbows on the slab.
And why is that?
A man came through here about 10 minutes ago, I said. Average height, bad haircut, wearing a sopping Raiders jacket and carrying a baby who wasn't too happy about it.
Yes.
She said with the same understated moan you'd use to talk about a piece of chocolate cake you remembered fondly.
They were here, just in time for their appointment, too.
I said nothing. Her smile faded, and she narrowed her eyes.
The child isn't his to give, is it?
He's one of mine,
Oh.
she said, shaking her head slowly, her tangled tresses dancing like half-charmed serpents.
That won't do. That won't do at all.
No, it won't, I said, biting off the end of each word.
Do you want me to go get them?
No, I said. The kid's my responsibility. I'm the one who's gotta do it.
You're so handsome when you're righteous.
Where are they?
7th corridor. Take it all the way to the top.
She said, gesturing to her left with a flick of a wrist. I followed her finger, my shoulders little more than a hair's breadth from the stone as I walked down the narrow hallway she indicated. Maybe a dozen steps in, there was a panel with a single button and a set of intricately cast brass doors. Tiny figures cavorted through the skyscraping spires, and dust devils of some ancient desert danced between the horizons. Men flew in clouds, and beasts standing on their hind ends pranced around fires. I pushed the button. The doors opened as if they'd been waiting for me. 4 harp noises sounded, expectant and welcoming. I grunted, stepped inside, and pressed the only button on the wall. The doors slid closed, and I began rising. I stood with my feet apart, staring at the vague outline reflected in the matte finish in front of me. I saw a big bruiser with too much hair and too much stomach, watching me with a blank, smeared countenance. A minute went by, then another. "The fuck are you staring at?" I grunted. The reflection jerked, then faded like mist on a bathroom mirror. It wasn't used to being spotted, much less recognized when somebody caught it playing magic mirror, which meant the watcher was running off to tell the master of the house who his unexpected guest was. That was good. I didn't want him to be surprised. It took 7 minutes to reach the top floor. The lights dimmed to a candle glimmer, and the doors slid back with little more than a whisper. I was out and moving before they'd finished yawning open. The sky parlor outside was huge. It was a big, open place with a tinted glass roof and floors of burnished black stone that shone like obsidian. A crowd blocked the center of the room, a ring of black suits and expensive coiffeurs that stood 3 or 4 deep, all looking toward the center. Above their heads loomed a massive golden throne set on a concrete pillar half the size of a train car. A figure leaned forward in the chair with one huge hand resting on the carved arm and a great bovine head tilted down to look at the scene before it. I smelled smoke and I heard crackling flames. A child wail, scared and plaintive, rose and was silenced. It hit the crowd and started pushing. I shoved a tall woman with a model's hips and a queen's icy glare to the floor, and elbowed a fat man with enough jewelry to shame a merchant king out of my way. A young man with the build of an action hero and a face I almost recognized stumbled when I bowled him under the arm, and an older lady with a severe bun and the disapproving gaze of a nun teaching school half fell to get out of my way. There were grunts and curses, but I didn't look back to see who they were from. The driver from downstairs, a two-time loser named Manny Flores, stood above a roaring fire pit. His hair was plastered to his head and water dripped from the hem of his jacket. He was holding the baby out in his arms. The kid had managed to get one pudgy arm free, and he was struggling and screaming his little head off. I didn't seem to be doing him any good, but that didn't stop him from trying. "I offer this child as the 7th sacrifice I have made in your service," Flores said, his voice quavering like a kid at his first championship spelling bee. "With this offering, I prove my loyalty and ask that you shower your blessings upon me." "You'll do no such goddamn thing," I shouted at him. If he'd been focused on what he was doing, Flores might have made the sacrifice in time. All he had to do was let go, and the kid would have tumbled into the hungry flames and been eaten up in seconds. But Flores was nervous, scared, and that little part of him that didn't want to do what he'd been doing hadn't been held underwater long enough to drown it completely. So he turned, and when he turned, I sank a fist in the side of his neck. His eyes rolled up, and he made a gagging, sputtering sound as blood flow to his brain stuttered. I snatched the child as Flores went down and held him close. The kid stopped crying, but he gave me a look that said he had the howling on a hair trigger and he wasn't afraid to start again. A sound like a stone rolling back from a tomb echoed in the vast chamber. The NC all around me fell to their knees, uncaring about how prostration would treat their designer shoes or bespoke suits. A shiver went through them, and for all their piety, all their devotion, in that moment the corporate priests remembered what it was to be frightened animals in the face of some vast, unknowing creature. They shrank down, keeping silent, squeezing their eyes shut and hoping not to be noticed. The baby glanced up, his little face tight with worry at the loud, unexpected sound. I turned to the idol and inclined my head. "1,000 pardons, Baal Molech," I said, taking care to pronounce the title correctly. Ancient Sumerian's tricky if you don't practice it once in a while, and I hadn't had the need. "I mean you no disrespect, but I had to act in haste." The golden god stared at me, its cavernous eyes filled with fires no man could ever conjure. It leaned forward and blew hot breath over my face. It smelled like burning metal and charred flesh. When the god spoke, its voice came from everywhere and nowhere.
"Malachi of the Thrones,"
it demanded, calling me by name.
"Explain yourself."
I bowed again, going a little lower than I had before. I didn't take my eyes off the thing. I wasn't stupid, but I tried for humble. I had not been made with an overabundance of that quality, but I put in the effort. "There's an understanding in this city, an agreement reached long ago. Flores here almost started a war because he didn't abide by that agreement." I held up the child, careful not to bring him so much as 1 inch closer to the bull-headed giant. "This boy's name is Ibrahim Goldstein. His father died before he was born, but his mother lived long enough to have a rabbi perform a bris over the boy before he was taken into child services. He is under my protection as per the agreement." I looked around at the men and women getting to their feet. Executive producers and money men, pharmacy tycoons and Silicon Valley pirates. They'd each done terrible things to claw their way up in the service of such a harsh master, and I could see the stains across their skin when I looked at them with the eyes of God. A blonde woman in the front row with bee-stung lips had blood on her hands that she hadn't confessed. A fat man wheezing over a puddle of puke had the ghostly, too wide eyes of one who coveted everything he saw. A young man, one of the crown princes of the movie Monarchy, had green-tainted cheeks to go with his hands, stained black by theft. All of them bore phantom smears of greasy, gray ashes across their foreheads to show they had left burnt offerings to the ancient king they bowed before. Flores moaned and stirred. I looked at him, and I saw everything I needed to see. I shut my eyes and relaxed the sight that God had made me with.
I warned him.
The Gilded God said. I nodded and tried not to let it show that my mental ears were ringing. I'm sure you did, I said. Ibrahim turned toward me, and I held him against my chest. I ran one scarred hand down his back, and he quieted. He didn't listen closely enough, it seems. The colossal king leaned back on its throne with the sound of a slow-motion train wreck. He waved one hand. Baal-Melech didn't speak. He didn't have to. We had an understanding that went way back. You! I pointed at a man in a pink shirt whose spectacles were askew after his face's impromptu introduction to the floor. Hold this child. You keep his face turned away, do you understand me? He tried to speak, but nothing came out. I raised an eyebrow and he came forward in short, jerky steps. I placed Ibrahim in his arms and the man held the boy like he was made of glass. I caught his arm. The boy sees none of this, I repeated. I looked at the others. They stared with bared teeth and dead eyes that gleamed in the fires like desert jackals. I let the man go, and he retreated back to the ranks. Flores was returning to the land of the living. He rolled to his knees and found his feet with the weaving grace possessed only by the truly punch-drunk. He tried to focus on me, but he was having difficulty. Who the fuck are you? He asked, words slurred as he tried to remember how to use his tongue. It doesn't matter, I said. I'd say a prayer if I were you. It probably won't help, but it can't hurt. Not where you're going. I was sure Flores was going to run, but he surprised me. Instead of heading for the door, trying to hook around the assembled witnesses to buy himself time, he came straight at me. Flores had his fists up, and he bellowed a wordless cry as he swung. The blow never landed. Flores struggled in my grip. He spit, he swore, and he strained. In moments, his battle cry turned to shrieks, and not long after, his shrieks faded to choked, wet sobs. Bones broke, muscles tore, and blood pattered the floor like spilled sacrament. I took my time, and I did what I had been made to do when the world was young and God had been in a particularly bad mood. The watches went white. Some of them spewed, leaving steaming puddles of muck that had probably cost 3 figures when they'd first eaten the meal. Not one man or woman looked away, and when I was finished, I dropped the breathing, moaning meat that had once been a down-on-his-luck social worker named Manny Flores to the floor. I raised my gaze to the congregation of child killers. They flinched. I smiled and held out my bloody hands. The babysitter came forward. I took Ibrahim back. He shifted and waved his pudgy arm around. I tucked it back inside his wrap. He closed his eyes and passed into sleep. I stepped forward, and the NC parted before me like the Red Sea before Moses. No one got in my way as I left. Nothing followed me either. I stepped out into the rain and tucked Ibrahim under my coat to keep him dry. The heavens scoured blood from my hands and washed it into the gutter where it wouldn't be missed. There was no amount of rain that could wash me clean, though. I'd made peace with that. I opened up the car still parked at the curb and got Ibrahim situated in the car seat again. He sneezed quietly, but it wasn't enough to wake him up all the way. I got behind the steering wheel and started up the engine with the keys I'd taken out of Manny's pocket. I plucked the folder out of the passenger footwell and opened it. Ibrahim was there, along with 6 other names. Melissa Black, born to a rape victim of no particular religious persuasion who'd given her up. John Baker, whose mother had died and whose father was nowhere to be found. Nikki Watts, whose mother had given a fake name and who, as far as they could tell, had just vanished out into the night. Brandon Cooper, who'd made it home from the hospital just in time for his parents to be killed in a home invasion. Jared Fletcher, who'd somehow survived the car wreck that had killed his guardians. The last was Jessica Butcher. Her parents hadn't thought they'd be shot dead on the way home from the movies, but that was the way things went in L.A. One by one, they'd been abandoned, lost, then forgotten. I looked at those names and read their files over and over again. I knew more than the pieces of paper did. I'd watched as one by one they'd been taken and traded in for favors, for money to pay off gambling debts, or for help making a few accusations disappear off Flores' legal records. I had sat in the shadows and done nothing, because that was the agreement. Not one of them had been blessed, baptized, or otherwise protected, so it had been open season for anyone who wanted to take them. Too young to be believers themselves, they couldn't ask me for help, and there was nothing I could do if nobody asked me. I glanced in the rearview mirror at Ibrahim. He fussed and blew a spit bubble, but other than that, he didn't move. I tossed the folder back in the footwell and pointed the car's nose east toward the bright lights of Hollywood Boulevard and the orphanage Ibrahim had been taken from in the first place. I drove through the rain and smiled a little bit. I'd gotten one, and I'd have to be content with that for now. "Suffer the children to come unto me," I said, quoting my least favorite of the two testaments. "For the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these."
Suffer the Children was written by Neil Litherland, and it can be found in his short story collection, The Rejects, linked in the video description below. This video uses tracks from Tabletop Audio, also listed in the video description. Other sound effects, images, and video clips were downloaded from Pixabay. Alice and Dinah were voiced by Alice Liddell. The story and outro were read by Neil Litherland, with additional voice talent provided by Gretchen Van Heeren. Script, audio, and video editing also by Neil Litherland. To ensure you don't miss future stories that appear on the channel, please like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can dive deeper down the rabbit hole and discover what else is lurking in the Carroll Institute's archive. Lastly, if you have a particular reality you would like to see the agents report on, make sure you leave it down in the comments below.